On August 1st, 2008, Gerard McDonnell stood on the summit of K2, the Savage Mountain, at 8,611 meters. He had just made history, becoming the first Irish climber ever to reach the top of the world's second highest and deadliest peak. But celebrations on K2 are always short-lived. As Gerard and dozens of others began their descent, disaster struck. A towering serac collapsed above the bottleneck, sweeping the route clean and tearing away the fixed ropes that climbers depended on to get down. In an instant, the way home was gone. Some climbers managed to escape, inching their way down through the night, risking everything on shattered ice. Others were trapped, exhausted, and helpless in the death zone, and Gerard McDonnell, rather than pushing ahead to save himself, made a different choice. He stayed. He stayed to help others entangled in the wreckage, to free climbers dangling from torn ropes, to do if he had the strength or the will to attempt in that frozen chaos. I'm mourning. Gerard was gone. Why did others survive the avalanche, while he did not? And what does his story reveal about courage, sacrifice, and the impossible choices climbers face in the death zone? To understand why Gerard McDonnell made the choices he did on K2, we need to know the man behind the climber. Born in Limerick, Ireland, Gerard grew up with a quiet curiosity about the world. Friends and family described him as kind, unassuming, and endlessly adventurous. He wasn't the type to seek fame or glory. He was the type who sought experience, who valued the journey as much as the summit. In the 1990s, he moved to Alaska, where he fell deeply in love with the mountains. There, Gerard honed his skills in the harsh, unpredictable conditions of Denali and the surrounding ranges. His climbing partners remembered him as steady, thoughtful, and above all, compassionate, the kind of person you wanted by your side when things went wrong. By 2003, Gerard had summited Everest as part of an international expedition. But it was K2 that called to him most. Known as the Savage Mountain, K2 is technically harder, more dangerous, and far less forgiving than Everest. For Gerard, it wasn't just about climbing the hardest peak, it was about testing himself in the most uncompromising arena of mountaineering. In 2008, he joined a multinational expedition to K2, eager to attempt what so many before him had failed. It would be his chance to write his own page in mountaineering history. But as those who knew him best would later say, Gerard was never climbing for recognition. He was climbing for the love of it, for the pure challenge, and for the camaraderie of the mountains. That spirit of compassion and courage would define not only his climb, but also the heartbreaking choices he made in his final hours. The summer of 2008 brought an unusual energy to K2. For weeks, teams had been pinned down at lower camps by unstable weather and avalanches. But by late July, forecasts pointed to something climbers dream of: a clear summit window. That prediction drew more than 30 climbers from multiple expeditions toward Camp 4, the high camp at 8,000 meters. Among them was Gerard McDonnell, climbing with the Dutch lad team. Spirits were high, but everyone knew what awaited them above. The route to K2 summit is dominated by the bottleneck, a narrow ice couloir that slices upward at a steep angle. Overhanging the chute is a massive serac and unstable ice cliff that could collapse at any moment. Every climber on K2 must pass beneath it, gambling with fate. On August 1st, conditions seemed perfect. Climbers from Korea, Norway, France, Nepal, Pakistan, and Ireland began their summit push in the early hours of the morning, but the climb quickly slowed. Fixing ropes through the bottleneck took longer than expected, and the line of climbers stretched into a traffic jam beneath the serac. Precious hours slipped away. By afternoon, many were still ascending when they should have been well on their way down. Summit fever had set, and after weeks of waiting, turning back seemed impossible. And so, despite the late hour, Gerard and dozens of others pressed on. Eventually, one by one, climbers reached the summit ridge. Among them was Gerard McDonnell, carrying the Irish flag to the top of K2. At 6:00 p.m. he stood on the Savage Mountain summit, becoming the first Irishman ever to do so. But celebration quickly gave way to urgency. Darkness was coming. Ahead lay the most dangerous part of the climb, the descent back through the bottleneck, beneath that towering serac that had loomed over them all day. Few realized that the mountain was about to unleash disaster. When Gerard McDonnell stepped onto the summit of K2, it was already late, too late by the standards of high-altitude climbing. The clock showed around 6:00 p.m. hours after the safe turnaround time. But the weather was calm, the skies unusually clear, and after years of preparation, he had done it. The first Irishman to stand on the Savage Mountain. For Gerard, it wasn't a moment of triumph for himself alone. He carried with him the pride of a nation and the dreams of every climber who had ever turned back just short of that summit. Photos were taken, flags were unfurled, and for a brief moment, all the exhaustion and fear seemed to vanish. But behind the smiles lay a looming reality. The descent was still ahead, the most dangerous part of any climb. On K2, more climbers died going down than going up, and Gerard and his companions were starting dangerously late. The delays in fixing ropes at the bottleneck had cost them precious daylight. Worse, the long line of climbers had stretched the summit attempt into the evening, leaving little margin for error. They were exhausted, low on oxygen, and facing a descent in darkness through the most lethal section of the mountain. Still, Gerard's nature was optimistic. He was known for his calm under pressure, for his ability to stay focused when others panicked. That composure would be tested in the hours to come. As the climbers turned back toward the bottleneck, headlamps flickered to life. A line of tiny lights traced its way down the icy couloir, each step a gamble beneath the looming serac. And then the mountain moved. The serac that had hung silently above them all day finally gave way, collapsing in an avalanche of ice and snow. In seconds, the route back down was destroyed. For Gerard McDonnell and the climbers trapped high on K2, the savage mountain had just changed the rules of survival. The sound came first a thunderous crack, like the mountain itself splitting apart. Then came the roar, an avalanche of ice cascading down from the serac that had loomed above the bottleneck all day. In an instant, the narrow couloir was swept with debris. Huge blocks of ice tore through the line of fixed ropes, the lifeline every climber depended on to descend. When the chaos settled, the mountain was silent again. But the damage was done. The way home had been ripped apart. For the climbers already in the bottleneck, it was catastrophe. Some were struck directly by falling ice, injured or killed instantly. Others were left dangling, their ropes shredded or buried beneath the avalanche debris. The fragile system of fixed lines that connected dozens of climbers to safety had simply vanished. High above, Gerard McDonnell and others realized what had happened. They were trapped. At over 8,200 meters in the death zone, the clock was now against them. Their oxygen supplies were running low. The night was closing in. In the descent path, the only way down was gone. Chaos spread through the climbers. Some tried to find alternative routes, inching across steep ice walls with no protection. Others sat down, paralyzed by exhaustion and fear. Communication was fragmented, different languages, different teams, each group unsure of where the others were. Amid the confusion, one reality became clear. Survival now depended not on reaching the summit, but on finding the courage to move downward through shattered terrain. And Gerard McDonnell, instead of rushing ahead, began to do something remarkable. He turned his attention to those in the greatest danger, the climbers tangled in ropes, injured by the avalanche, too weak to descend on their own. While others fought to save themselves, Gerard chose to stay behind, in the most dangerous place on the mountain, to try to save the lives of others. It was a decision that would define his legacy, and it would also cost him everything. As night fell on K2, survivors later recalled seeing a faint glow of a headlamp moving slowly in the bottleneck. It was Gerard McDonnell. While many climbers pressed downward in desperation, Gerard stopped to help those who could not move. Several climbers, Korean, Nepali, and Pakistani, had been struck or entangled when the serac collapsed. Some were hanging from torn ropes, others were pinned in the wreckage. In the death zone, where every step feels like lifting a mountain, Gerard somehow found the strength to assist them. He cut ropes, freed trapped climbers, and tried to guide the injured down. Reports differ about his exact actions. Confusion reigned in the darkness, but multiple survivors credited Gerard with saving lives that night. Without him, even more would have perished in the chaos. But every minute spent helping others was a minute lost for himself. Hours passed, oxygen ran out, and exhaustion set in. By dawn, Gerard was still high on the mountain, too far gone to descend. The last confirmed sighting of him came from other climbers who saw him near the bottleneck, still working to free those trapped, long after most had retreated. Not long after, he disappeared into silence. While others staggered down to safety, Gerard McDonnell remained where the mountain had broken its climbers. His final hours were spent not in pursuit of glory, but in acts of compassion, choosing to help others even as his own life slipped away. When news of the 2008 K2 disaster broke, the world was stunned. 11 climbers were dead, dozens more barely escaped, and the mountain had once again lived up to its brutal reputation as the savage mountain. But one story stood out: Gerard McDonnell's. Unlike many who fought desperately for their own survival, Gerard had chosen to stop and help others. Some hailed him as a hero. Others asked an uncomfortable question: could he have survived if he hadn't stayed behind? Survivors from the Korean team later reported that Gerard had freed climbers tangled in ropes and helped those immobilized by the avalanche. His efforts almost certainly saved lives. Yet in the death zone, such acts come at an enormous cost. Every ounce of energy spent on another climber is energy lost for yourself. On K2, that trade-off can mean the difference between life and death. Some critics argue that Gerard's compassion, while noble, doomed him. Others push back, saying that his choices represented the very essence of mountaineering, that no summit, no survival, is worth abandoning humanity. The debate quickly spread beyond the climbing world. Was K2 merely a place of selfish struggle, or could it also be a stage for courage and sacrifice? Gerard's story became central to that discussion. For those who knew him, the answer was clear. Gerard had always been someone who put people before pride. On K2, he simply lived out his values, even when the mountain demanded the highest price. In the aftermath, his name was remembered not among those who simply reached the summit, but among those who gave everything to help others. And while others escaped the avalanche, it was Gerard McDonnell's compassion in the death zone that became the defining legacy of the 2008 disaster. Gerard McDonnell's story is not just another tale of loss on the savage mountain. It is a story of choice of one man who, when faced with the same deadly odds as everyone else, chose compassion over survival. Others managed to escape the avalanche of 2008. Some pushed through the chaos and made it down, but Gerard stayed. He stayed in the most dangerous place on K2 long after his own chances were gone, because he could not walk away from those who needed help. In the cold arithmetic of the death zone, where survival is measured in oxygen bottles and minutes of strength, Gerard's decision defies logic. Yet it is precisely that defiance that makes his story endure. The savage mountain may have claimed his life, but it could not claim his spirit. Today, Gerard McDonnell is remembered not just as the first Irishman to summit K2, but as a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and humanity in the harshest environment on Earth. K2 exposes the extremes of ambition and the limits of endurance. But Gerard's final hours remind us of something far greater, that even in the shadow of death, compassion can shine brighter than the summit itself.